Imagine this: a poor boy, with nothing but determination in his heart, rejects a millionaire's money, not out of pride or ego, but for something much deeper. What would make this boy turn down a life-changing offer from someone who could change his world forever? And what he asked for in return made even the most powerful man in the room break down in tears. Sounds impossible, right? But this is exactly what happened to young Ben. Every morning, long before the sun rises, Ben wakes up to the creak of the worn-out floorboards in the small, dimly lit room he shares with his father. The walls are cracked and peeling, the barest of furniture cluttered around the space. It's a simple, humble existence, but it's the only life Ben has ever known. The mornings are cold, and the thin blanket on his bed does little to keep the chill at bay. But it's not the cold that keeps Ben awake. It's the constant, nagging thought that he needs to help his father, his only family. Ben's father, Tom, has been ill for as long as Ben can remember. The sickness has kept him from working, leaving Ben to pick up the slack. Each day, Ben heads out to the local market, where he works tirelessly, selling whatever goods he can get his hands on. It's hard work, and the pay is barely enough to get them through another day. But Ben doesn't complain. He doesn't have time for that. What keeps him going is the dream. His dream of a better life for both him and his father. He wants to give his father the care he deserves and make sure they never have to struggle like this again. But with each passing day, Ben's world feels smaller, the walls of their little room closing in on him. And yet, despite the hardships, there's always that glimmer of hope in Ben's heart. He won't give up, no matter what it takes. The sun had barely risen, and the sleepy town of Riverton was already waking up. For Ben, mornings were the hardest part of the day. He woke up before the world stirred, feeling the chill of the air creeping into the small, dilapidated room he shared with his father, Tom. But it wasn't just the cold that kept him going. It was the responsibility, the weight of ensuring that they had enough to eat, enough to survive another day. Ben quickly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake his father, who was still resting fitfully. The room they lived in was small, cramped, and the walls, once painted a vibrant color, were now peeling, showing their age and wear. As Ben dressed, he could hear his father's shallow breathing, a reminder of the illness that had kept him bedridden for the better part of the year. But Ben couldn't focus on that. There was work to be done. He had to get to the market before the others. Riverton's market was the heart of the town, a bustling hub where vendors shouted out their prices, customers haggled over fresh fruits and vegetables, and life seemed to move at a pace all its own. Ben's stall was modest. His fruits, often a little bruised or overripe, didn't fetch the highest prices, but they were affordable, just what the people in his neighborhood needed. He worked quickly, setting up his table in the corner of the market, just far enough from the larger, more well-established vendors. As the market came to life around him, Ben's focus was clear. He had a job to do. The buyers were starting to trickle in, and Ben had his routine down to a science. He greeted familiar faces with a polite nod, offered discounts where he could, and packed the goods into bags with a careful hand. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. The sounds of the market filled the air, laughter, chattering voices, the clink of coins being exchanged. Ben was used to it. But today, something was different. There was an undercurrent of tension, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Maybe it was just the exhaustion in his bones, the weight of the long days catching up to him. Or maybe, he thought, it was something else entirely. As he wrapped up a bundle of bananas for an elderly customer, his sharp ears caught something. A noise. A sharp, metallic screech that seemed to slice through the air. At first, he thought it was just a car skidding to a stop, but the sound grew louder, more frantic. Ben's heart raced. He turned his head just in time to see a car careening down the narrow street at breakneck speed. It was out of control, swerving and zigzagging, its tires screeching against the pavement. "Watch out!" Ben shouted. But the warning came too late. A woman, Clara as he would later learn, was walking across the street, unaware of the danger. She was too close, too vulnerable to the out-of-control vehicle. Ben's instincts kicked in, his body moving before his brain could fully comprehend what was happening. Without thinking, he leapt forward, pushing the woman out of the way with all his strength. They tumbled to the ground, narrowly missing the car as it slammed into the curb and screeched to a halt. The world seemed to stand still for a moment. Ben's heart hammered in his chest, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Clara, stunned, lay on the pavement beside him, her eyes wide with shock. She was breathing heavily, her body trembling, but she was alive. Ben couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. He had acted without thought, simply because he couldn't stand the idea of someone being hurt on his watch. Ben barely had time to process what was happening when a voice cut through the haze. "Clara, are you all right?" Ben turned to see a man, tall, well-dressed with graying hair and an aura of authority, rushing toward them. His face was ashen, eyes filled with concern. As he reached Clara's side, he knelt down, taking her in his arms as though she were the most precious thing in the world. His relief was palpable as he checked her for injuries. "Clara, thank God you're okay," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. Clara, still shaken, nodded, her voice trembling. I didn't even see the car coming. If it weren't for him." She glanced over at Ben, her eyes filled with gratitude. "He saved me." The man, now standing, turned his gaze toward Ben, his expression shifting from concern to something deeper, something Ben couldn't quite read. For a brief moment they stood there in silence, the only sound the distant chatter of the market, now seeming oddly distant. The stranger looked at Ben, as though trying to figure out who this young boy was. The scene in front of Ben felt like a blur. His heart was still racing from the adrenaline, his legs shaky, but his focus was on Clara, who was still sitting on the ground, her breath unsteady. He hadn't really thought much about what he'd just done. His only thought had been saving her. Yet, as the man, who must have been Clara's father, knelt beside her, Ben started to realize the gravity of what had just happened. The man's voice was thick with emotion as he helped Clara to her feet. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, his hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch her too roughly. Clara nodded, still in shock, but clearly unharmed. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still for a moment. Ben's heart hammered in his chest, his breath coming in sharp gasps. Clara, stunned, lay on the pavement beside him, her eyes wide with shock. She was breathing heavily, her body trembling. But she was alive. Ben couldn't quite grasp what had just happened. He had acted without thought, simply because he couldn't stand the idea of someone being hurt on his watch. Ben barely had time to process what was happening when a voice cut through the haze. "Clara, are you all right?" Ben turned to see a man, tall, well-dressed, with graying hair and an aura of authority, rushing toward them. His face was ashen, eyes filled with concern. As he reached Clara's side, he knelt down, taking her in his arms as though she were the most precious thing in the world. His relief was palpable as he checked her for injuries. "Clara, thank God you're okay," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. Clara, still shaken, nodded, her voice trembling. I didn't even see the car coming. If it weren't for him." She glanced over at Ben, her eyes filled with gratitude. "He saved me." The man, now standing, turned his gaze toward Ben, his expression shifting from concern to something deeper, something Ben couldn't quite read. For a brief moment, they stood there in silence, the only sound the distant chatter of the market, now seeming oddly distant. The stranger looked at Ben, as though trying to figure out who this young boy was. "Ben," he said, his voice deep and measured. "What you did, it's beyond words. I owe you more than I can express." Ben was caught off guard. He hadn't expected any praise. He didn't think he'd done anything out of the ordinary. All he could think about was getting Clara out of harm's way, But the man was still looking at him, his face softening with sincerity. Ben's mouth went dry. I didn't do it for anything, he muttered, unsure of how to respond. I couldn't let her get hurt. The millionaire studied him for a long moment, as if weighing something. His gaze was intense, but there was something kind in it. After a pause, he spoke again, the offer coming out slowly. Ben, he said quietly, you may not want anything, but I want to offer you something. Anything, really. If there's something I can do for you, for your future, for your family, you let me know. Ben's heart skipped a beat. He was taken aback, his mind racing. Was this real? This man, this stranger, offering help without a second thought? Ben looked down, unsure how to process such an overwhelming offer. The millionaire seemed to sense Ben's hesitation, his gaze softening further. I don't expect you to decide now, he added. But if there's anything at all, consider it. He gave Ben a firm, yet gentle pat on the shoulder before turning his attention back to Clara, who had started to recover from the shock. Ben didn't know what to say. The world around him felt strange, distorted even, as he tried to make sense of the millionaire's words. His thoughts were jumbled, his mind still reeling from the chaos of the accident. How could this be happening to him? Before Ben could say anything else, Clara gently placed a hand on his arm, offering him a reassuring smile. We'll figure it out, Ben. Don't worry, she said softly. Ben nodded, still in a daze, unsure of how this moment would change everything. Ben stood there, his mind racing, trying to process the exchange that had just taken place. It felt like time had slowed, and yet the world around him continued to rush forward, bustling with noise and movement. The people in the market were still going about their business, oblivious to the monumental shift that had just occurred in Ben's life. Clara's father, the millionaire, gave Ben one last look, his expression softening with a quiet intensity. He wasn't pushing Ben to make a decision. It was more like he was offering an open door, an invitation to step into a world that Ben had never even dreamed of. Take your time, the man said again, his voice gentle but firm. But think about it, Ben. I've seen a lot of people in my life, and what you did, well, that kind of selflessness isn't something you see every day. If you ever need anything, if you ever want to change your circumstances, I can help. You don't have to go through this alone. The weight of those words hung in the air, and Ben felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to reach out, grab that lifeline, and pull himself and his father out of their struggles. But another part of him resisted, feeling as though he didn't belong in this world of wealth and privilege. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of help. I don't know, Ben said, his voice hesitant. He took a step back, unsure of how to handle the situation. I don't want charity. I just did what anyone would do. The millionaire nodded, a small, understanding smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I'm not offering charity, Ben. I'm offering a chance to change your life if you ever decide you want to take it. His eyes locked onto Ben's with a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. Ben swallowed hard, his mind spinning. He had always dreamed of something more, a life where his father didn't have to suffer, where he didn't have to struggle just to get by. But this wasn't just an offer of money. It was a different kind of opportunity, one that felt almost too big to grasp. You're not just offering money, are you? Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man shook his head. No, Ben. What I'm offering is a chance to build something for yourself. A future where you don't have to wake up every day worried about how you'll make ends meet. A future where you can follow your dreams, whatever they may be. Ben's heart raced again. It sounded like a fairy tale, like something out of a book. Was it even possible? Could he really take a step into a different world, a world that seemed so far removed from everything he knew? Clara, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward. Her presence was calming, her steady gaze reassuring. She smiled at Ben, offering him the quiet support she had given him ever since they met. "It's okay to accept help, Ben," she said gently. "You've done enough for everyone around you. You deserve a chance." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had never considered that he might deserve something, anything, good for himself. All his life, he had been focused on survival, on making sure his father had enough, on doing what was right. He hadn't thought much about what he wanted or what he deserved. "Think about it, Ben," Clara's father said once more, his voice kind but insistent. "I'll be here when you're ready. There's no rush." As Ben stood there, the weight of the decision pressing down on him, he couldn't help but wonder. Was this his chance? Was he really ready to change his life? Or was it too much, too fast? The offer hung in the air between them, and for the first time in his life, Ben felt like he had a choice. Despite the millionaire's kind words and the genuine offer of a better life, Ben couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort that settled in his chest. He had been raised on the idea that nothing in life came easy, that every penny earned, every favor given, was hard won. So, the thought of just accepting help, especially from a stranger, felt foreign to him. For a moment, he stood there, feeling the weight of his father's illness pressing on him. Tom had always been the one to remind Ben that life wasn't fair, that you had to fight for what you wanted, no matter the cost. It was this mentality that had kept Ben going all these years, even when things seemed impossible. To him, accepting help felt like a betrayal, like he was taking the easy way out. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type "juice" if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. Ben glanced at Clara, who was watching him closely. She had this look in her eyes, one of understanding, but also of hope. She knew that this could be his chance to change things for both of them. Ben opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out. His mind was still tangled in confusion, torn between the practicality of his current life and the allure of a different, more secure future. "I don't know," he said at last, the words coming out in a rush. "I've never taken anything from anyone. I'm not like that. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness or be in debt to you." Clara's father, sensing his hesitation, took a step forward, his expression softening. "Ben, you're not taking advantage of anyone. You're not asking for a handout. You're being offered an opportunity. There's a difference. You've earned this with your actions, your bravery, and you don't have to go through everything alone." But even as he spoke, Ben could feel his walls going up. The thought of stepping into a world where everything was easier, more certain, felt overwhelming. What would that mean for him? What would it mean for his father? Ben had always carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. It was what had kept him going all these years, and now it felt as though everything was about to change in a way that was too big to control. "I just don't know if I'm ready for something like this," Ben murmured, looking down at his feet. "It's too much. I don't even know where to start." Clara, sensing the internal struggle, gently placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," she said softly. "No one expects you to. But maybe this is the start of something better, for you, for your father, for both of you." Ben felt a lump form in his throat. He was so used to handling everything on his own, to being the one who took care of his father. To suddenly have someone else, someone who didn't even know him, offer him a chance at a different life, felt like too much to process. "I appreciate it," Ben said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I can't just jump into something like this without thinking it through. I need time." Clara's father nodded slowly, understanding. "Of course. Take all the time you need, Ben. The offer stands. But know that you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Ben felt something in his chest lighten. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the weight of a burden he had been carrying for so long, starting to ease. He wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. But Ben knew one thing. This was a turning point in his life. Whether he accepted the offer or not, things were never going to be the same. The next few days passed in a blur for Ben. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself replaying the moment the millionaire, Mr. Andrews, had offered him a chance at a different life. The weight of that offer seemed to follow him everywhere he went, a reminder of everything he could have, but wasn't sure he deserved. But as the days wore on, there was something else occupying his thoughts, something that wouldn't let him escape. His father, Tom. Tom had been getting weaker, despite all the medicines Ben had managed to scrape together for him. Ben tried to put on a brave face, tried to pretend that things were fine, but deep down, he knew that his father's condition was worsening. Ben had already spent so many sleepless nights sitting by his father's side, praying for a miracle. But miracles weren't something that came easily to people like them. That afternoon, as Ben was working at the market, a familiar figure appeared in the distance. Mr. Andrews, Clara's father, was walking towards him, his gait purposeful, as always. His eyes locked onto Ben's from across the street, and for a moment, Ben felt a nervous flutter in his chest. He hadn't spoken to Mr. Andrews since the accident, and despite the promise of help, Ben wasn't sure how to face him again. "Ben!" Mr. Andrews called out as he neared, his voice calm but firm. "I know you've been thinking a lot about my offer, and I respect that. But I wanted to let you know that the team at the hospital is ready to help. They're just waiting for you." Ben's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what Mr. Andrews was referring to, the opportunity to give his father the kind of care that Ben could never afford. His stomach twisted with both relief and guilt. You mean the hospital?" Ben asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're really going to send someone for him?" Mr. Andrews nodded, his expression softening. "It's all arranged, Ben. A team of doctors will be there within the hour. No one should have to suffer when help is available." Ben was silent for a moment, his mind racing. He had spent so many years believing that he was the one responsible for carrying the burden. Now, Mr. Andrews was offering a solution, but the weight of accepting it felt like a mountain. "I don't know what to say," Ben murmured, his voice barely audible. "I never thought I'd have a chance like this." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Andrews replied gently. "You don't have to decide anything right now. This is about your father. And if he gets better, if you get the chance to live without this weight on your shoulders, I want you to know that it's available." Ben swallowed hard. For so long, he had fought to be self-sufficient, to handle everything himself. And yet, here he was, being offered the kind of help he had never thought possible. The fear of losing control, of admitting that he needed help, made him hesitate. Can I take you up on it? Can you send the team?" Ben asked, his voice shaking with a mix of relief and fear. Mr. Andrews smiled, a reassuring look in his eyes. "Of course, Ben, I'm happy to help. And this time, it's not just about money. It's about giving you both the future you deserve." With those words, Ben felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't the weight of his father's illness, which still loomed over him, but the weight of carrying the burden alone. For the first time in a long while, Ben allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. Mr. Andrews made good on his word, sending a team of doctors to Ben's home that very afternoon. As the medical professionals assessed his father's condition, Ben couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the sudden change in their lives. It wasn't just the medical care, it was the realization that things could actually get better. But even as the hope began to build, Ben's thoughts couldn't escape one thing: the offer. The idea that someone like him, someone with nothing, could be given the chance to change. Everything was still hard to believe. As he sat by his father's side that evening, watching the medical team work, Ben finally let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally going to get the chance to see a different future. One where he didn't have to face it all on his own. As the doctors worked on his father, Ben found himself sitting in the corner of the room, his mind racing. There was so much happening all at once, and he couldn't seem to keep up with it all. The team of medical professionals moved around his father with practiced efficiency, but Ben felt as though everything was moving in slow motion, like he was trapped in a dream he couldn't escape from. The offer from Mr. Andrews weighed heavily on him. It was everything he had dreamed of and more. His father's health improving, a chance at a better life. A life that didn't involve constantly worrying about where the next meal would come from. But with that opportunity came something Ben wasn't sure he was ready for. Change. His whole life, he had been taught that you had to earn everything, that nothing worth having came easily. He had never allowed himself to dream of a life outside of the one he knew, one where he struggled day after day, just to keep his father alive and keep their small world from falling apart. And now, suddenly, the very thing he had been too afraid to ask for was being offered to him on a silver platter. It was too much. Ben looked over at his father, who was now resting more comfortably, thanks to the doctor's care. Tom's face, which had once been pale and weary, was beginning to regain some of its color. The change was subtle, but it was there. Ben felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly replaced by the heavy weight of guilt. Was it right to accept help? To let someone else bear the cost of his father's treatment when Ben had always sworn to do it himself? The guilt gnawed at him. He had always prided himself on being independent, on never needing to rely on anyone. But now, here he was, on the verge of accepting something he wasn't sure he deserved. "You don't have to do it alone, Ben." Clara's voice interrupted his thoughts. He hadn't realized she had entered the room until she was standing by his side, her presence a quiet comfort. He turned to her, his eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. "I don't know what to do, Clara. I've never asked for help before. I've always been the one who fixes things, who takes care of everything. It feels wrong. I don't want to owe anyone anything." Clara gave him a soft, understanding smile. "You're not owing anyone anything. Mr. Andrews isn't offering you charity. He's offering you a chance to build something better. And if you're willing to take it, you're not just doing it for you. You're doing it for your father too." Ben ran a hand through his hair, a deep sigh escaping him. "I don't know if I'm ready to change everything. It feels like I'm abandoning everything I've worked for. Like I'm letting go of the only way I've ever known how to live." Clara's gaze softened, and she stepped closer, placing a hand gently on his arm. "It's okay to change, Ben. It's okay to let go of the past and let yourself have a better future. You've worked so hard, but you don't have to keep fighting like this forever. Sometimes, letting someone else help isn't a weakness. It's strength." Her words lingered in the air, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. Ben had never considered that. To him, letting go of his pride and asking for help was the ultimate sign of weakness. But Clara made it seem like a path forward, a way to step into a future that wasn't so overwhelming. For the first time in days, Ben allowed himself to picture what that future could look like. A life where he didn't have to carry the weight of everything on his shoulders. A life where he could actually make something of himself without constantly fighting to survive. But could he do it? Could he accept the change and take that first step into a new world? "I don't know if I'm ready," Ben said quietly, his voice shaky with emotion. "But maybe I'm ready to try." Clara smiled softly. "That's all anyone can ask for, Ben. Just take the first step." Ben looked at his father again, now resting peacefully, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of peace himself. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment when everything began to change. And maybe he didn't have to do it all alone. With his father's health slowly stabilizing and the promise of change lingering in his mind, Ben found himself stepping into a completely new world. One that began with the doors of Jefferson High School. It was a far cry from the familiar confines of the marketplace where he'd spent countless early mornings. The school's brick facade and neatly manicured lawns spoke of opportunities and challenges that Ben had only ever glimpsed from afar. Walking through the halls for the first time, Ben felt the weight of curious eyes. His worn jeans and simple shirt starkly contrasted with the crisp uniforms and polished shoes of his classmates. Whispers and sidelong glances trailed in his wake, each one a reminder that he was different. Yet, amid the unfamiliar buzz of chatter and laughter, Ben sensed a quiet promise of new beginnings. Here, he might finally learn more than just what the day-to-day struggle demanded. He might learn about himself. In his literature class, where the teacher's deep, resonant voice filled the room with tales of hope and perseverance, Ben found a peculiar comfort. When the teacher asked for someone to share a personal story, Ben hesitated only for a moment before standing up. In that vulnerable moment, he spoke of his struggles and dreams with a raw honesty that left the room hushed. Some of his classmates exchanged glances, their expressions softening as they listened. It was as if his words had drawn a veil away, revealing a depth they hadn't anticipated. After class, Clara, who had become both friend and quiet supporter, approached him. "You have a way with words, Ben," she said kindly. "I think people will start to see you for who you really are." Her encouragement was like a gentle breeze that stirred a long-forgotten hope within him. That day, as the final bell rang, Ben walked out of the school feeling a mix of apprehension and exhilaration. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he believed that perhaps this new world of education and possibility could help him build a future where both he and his father could finally thrive. In the weeks that followed his first tentative steps into the world of Jefferson High, Ben began to truly test his limits. The hallways, though still echoing with curious glances and hushed whispers about the new, unpolished student, became a sort of proving ground for him. Each day, as he walked to class, the contrast between his worn sneakers and faded jeans and the neatly pressed uniforms of his classmates was a reminder of his different world, a world of struggle, hard work, and sacrifice. Yet, with every step, something within him stirred. A quiet, persistent determination that had been honed over years of fighting for survival. One crisp autumn morning, during a lively class discussion on the nature of bravery and the challenges of adversity, the teacher, Mr. Lawson, invited students to share personal stories of courage. The room, usually filled with the low murmur of students exchanging glances, fell silent as the topic unfolded. Ben sat at the back, his heart pounding as memories of early mornings in his cramped room and long, uncertain days at the market flickered through his mind. He recalled the countless times he'd pushed aside his own needs just to care for his ailing father, the nights spent watching over Tom as he struggled with his illness, and the unspoken promise he made to himself never to give up, even when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type waterfall if you've made it this far. Only those who get this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. Summoning every ounce of bravery, Ben raised his hand. When Mr. Lawson nodded in invitation, Ben's voice, though initially trembling, grew steadier with each word. He began by describing the modest room he shared with his father, the peeling walls that bore silent witness to years of hardship, and the cold, unyielding mornings that forced him into a day of relentless work at the market. As he spoke, he recalled the adrenaline of that fateful day when he leaped into action to save Clara, a moment of pure, uncalculated bravery that even surprised him. His words painted a picture of resilience, of nights spent worrying and mornings driven by hope, of the quiet courage required to keep pushing forward when the odds were stacked against him. The room absorbed every detail, and as Ben continued, his narrative shifted from personal struggle to a declaration of hope. He explained how, in that singular moment of crisis, he had realized that true courage wasn't about grand gestures or heroic acts. It was about the willingness to change one's destiny, to open oneself to the possibility that life could be more than just an endless cycle of hardship. His voice, filled with a mixture of raw vulnerability and newfound resolve, carried the weight of years spent fighting the tide of despair. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream openly of a future where he might rise above the limitations of his circumstances, where he could finally give back not just to himself, but to his father and the community that had watched him struggle in silence. As Ben finished speaking, the silence in the classroom was profound. His classmates, many of whom had only seen him as the quiet, reserved boy from the market, now looked at him with something resembling respect, and perhaps even admiration. Mr. Lawson's eyes shone with pride, and a few students exchanged nods, as if silently acknowledging the incredible courage it took to share such a personal story. In that moment, Ben felt seen, not as an outsider, but as someone with a story worth telling. The experience left him both emotionally raw and invigorated, igniting a spark that promised a future where his inner strength could propel him beyond the hardships of his past. In the days following the intervention at home, a subtle transformation began to take shape in Tom's fragile health. The once constant, labored breaths that had punctuated long, restless nights started to ease, replaced by moments of quiet, steady breathing that whispered of recovery. Each morning, as Ben watched his father slowly rise from bed, there was a delicate hope that had taken root. A hope that, despite the hardships, life might yet offer them a reprieve from the relentless struggle. The change was gradual, but unmistakable. The color began to return to Tom's cheeks, and the pallor that had long defined his face softened with each passing day. It wasn't a miraculous recovery that happened overnight, but a series of small victories, a better night's sleep here, a slightly more vibrant smile there, that collectively signified progress. Ben found himself sitting by his father's bedside, reading old letters and reminiscing about days gone by, the gentle hum of recovery echoing in the quiet moments they shared. There was a tenderness in those moments, a deep, unspoken understanding that each day was a precious gift. As Tom grew stronger, the home that had once felt like a haven of worry slowly transformed into a space filled with cautious optimism. The once familiar scent of antiseptic mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the morning, symbolizing both care and the promise of a new beginning. Ben's careful monitoring, coupled with the steady support of the medical team that Mr. Andrews had arranged, gave him the strength to believe that perhaps their circumstances were changing for the better. But it wasn't just physical recovery that marked Tom's transformation. In his quieter moments, as he regained a measure of strength, Tom began to share memories with Ben that had been long kept under lock and key. Stories of his own youth, of dreams once held dear before the weight of life's hardships took over, emerged like delicate blossoms in the early spring. These shared recollections forged an even deeper bond between father and son, a bond that spoke of resilience, love, and the quiet hope that even in the darkest times, life could offer moments of light. For Ben, witnessing his father's slow but steady recovery was both a relief and a bittersweet reminder of all they had endured. Every small step forward was a victory, a testament to the fact that change was possible, that even the most entrenched struggles could yield to hope and determination. And while the future still held uncertainties, in those precious, shared moments of recovery, Ben began to see a future not defined solely by hardship, but by the promise of healing and the enduring strength of family. As Tom's health began to steadily improve, the atmosphere in their modest home started to shift from one of anxious waiting to a quiet anticipation of better days. Yet, with the slow return of strength in his father's eyes, came an unexpected stirring, a secret that had long been buried beneath the weight of hardship and silence. One quiet evening, as Ben sat by his father's bedside, watching the gentle rise and fall of his breathing, Tom's gaze wandered to an old, faded photograph resting on the nightstand. It was a picture of a woman, smiling warmly, a woman Ben had never seen before. His father's eyes glistened with a mixture of sorrow and tenderness as he reached for the photo with trembling hands. "Ben," Tom began softly, his voice heavy with years of unspoken stories, "there's something I've kept from you. Something about your mother, a secret I thought I was protecting you from." Ben's heart pounded as he listened, every word hanging in the air like a delicate, fragile thread. Tom explained that before the hard times, before the long struggle to keep their small world together, there was a time filled with hope and promise. His wife, Mary, had been a vibrant, loving soul, a woman with dreams as wide as the open sky. But life had taken a harsh turn, and Mary had vanished from their lives under circumstances that Tom had never been able to fully explain. "I always believed I was sparing you the pain," Tom confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of regret, "because I thought you were too young to understand why things had to be the way they were." He paused, the silence stretching between them as the gravity of his revelation sank in. "I thought that by keeping this secret, I could shield you from more hurt. But as you grow older, I see that you deserve to know the truth." Ben felt a mix of shock and compassion. The image of his mother, a person he had never known, whose memory had been shrouded in mystery, suddenly became a part of his identity. Questions swirled in his mind. Who was she? Why had she disappeared? And most importantly, what did it mean for the life he was now beginning to rebuild? Tom's eyes, brimming with both regret and hope, met Ben's. "Your mother was everything to me, and I hope that one day you might understand. Perhaps knowing her story will help you understand who you are and where you come from." In that moment, the small room filled with a bittersweet mix of sorrow and promise. Ben realized that this secret, long hidden in the recesses of his father's heart, was not just a story of loss, but a key to understanding his own past and, perhaps, his future. The revelation of his mother's existence was like a spark, a small, glowing ember of the life he had never known, that ignited within him a yearning to uncover the truth. As the night deepened, Ben sat silently, processing the flood of emotions. The secret of his mother added a new layer to his journey, a mystery that beckoned him forward even as it reminded him of the pain of the past. It was a secret that promised answers but also carried the risk of reopening old wounds. Yet, in that quiet, reflective moment, Ben understood that to truly move forward, he needed to confront the shadows of his history. The revelation was a turning point, a quiet catalyst that would propel him toward a deeper understanding of himself and his family. A journey that was just beginning, filled with uncertainty and the promise of healing. Just when Ben thought he had begun to piece together the fragments of his family's past, an unexpected revelation shattered the quiet comfort of their new beginning. One cool evening, as the golden light of dusk filtered through the living room window, there was a gentle knock at the door. Tom exchanged a knowing yet cautious glance with Ben, a silent signal that something significant was about to unfold. When Tom opened the door, there stood the man known to them as Mr. Andrews, who had come by previously to offer support after the unsettling events at the market. His presence was steady and reassuring, but tonight his eyes carried a weight of unspoken truths. With a calm, deliberate tone, Mr. Andrews introduced himself, not simply as a benefactor, but as Edward Andrews, a name that carried a deeper connection than anyone had suspected. "Tom," Edward began softly, his voice layered with both regret and longing. "We share more than just the hardships of our current lives. I am not merely a friend here to offer help. I am your brother. We were separated long ago, caught in the storm of circumstances neither of us could control." The words fell into the room like a revelation. Ben's heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and curiosity, while Tom's features shifted between sorrow and relief as he absorbed the truth. Edward went on to reveal a long-guarded family secret, a painful chapter of separation born from difficult choices and the desire to protect a fragile family. Tom had hidden this truth, believing it would spare Ben additional heartache and shield him from a past riddled with loss. Edward's disclosure not only explained the subtle hints and missing pieces in Ben's own story, but also redefined the meaning behind the kindness they had received. The man who had once visited as Mr. Andrews was now unveiled as Edward, the long-lost brother whose reappearance was meant to heal old wounds rather than claim past glories. As the evening deepened into night, the three men, Tom, Edward, and Ben, sat together in the modest living room. They began to share stories of a past filled with both pain and love. Edward recounted memories of a childhood interrupted by separation, while Tom spoke of years marked by solitude and regret. For Ben, every word was a revelation, each detail drawing him closer to understanding not only his father's hidden past, but also the legacy of a family that had once been whole. In that tender moment, the truth forged a new bond between them, a promise that the past, with all its hidden sorrows, need not dictate their future. Ben felt the stirrings of hope, an invitation to embrace his roots and finally become part of a family ready to mend and move forward together. In the wake of Edward's earth-shattering revelation, Ben felt an overwhelming pull toward the unknown chapters of his past, specifically the life and legacy of his mother, Mary. For as long as he could remember, Mary had been an enigmatic presence, a name spoken in hushed reverence, a memory hinted at through the faded edges of old photographs and the few carefully hidden letters that his father, Tom, had guarded as if they were relics of another life. Now, with his family's secrets beginning to surface like long-dormant embers, Ben was determined to uncover every detail of the woman who had once been the heart of their family. Accompanied by Edward, whose own life had been irrevocably changed by the same long-buried truths, Ben embarked on a journey northward to a quaint, picturesque town nestled in upstate New York. This town, with its time-worn brick storefronts, narrow cobblestone streets, and clusters of century-old homes, seemed to pulse with the energy of stories waiting to be told. Every corner of the town, every weathered bench in the town square, appeared to whisper secrets of the past. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, setting a scene that was both melancholic and inviting, a perfect backdrop for the quest to rediscover Mary. Their first stop was the town's historic library, an inviting yet venerable building with creaking wooden floors and tall, narrow windows that filtered in soft streams of natural light. Inside, shelves upon shelves of yellowed newspapers, handwritten diaries, and archival records formed a mosaic of the town's history. Ben spent hours poring over microfiche reels and brittle documents, his fingers trembling as he turned each fragile page. He discovered clippings that recounted community events, charitable drives, and local celebrations, all of which repeatedly mentioned Mary. Articles painted her as a beacon of hope, a woman who had organized neighborhood gatherings, helped run local soup kitchens, and inspired others with her unyielding kindness. One particularly rainy afternoon, Ben found himself seated at a long, polished oak table in a quiet corner of the library. There, he met Eleanor, an elderly librarian whose eyes sparkled with decades of stories and memories. Over cups of steaming tea, Eleanor recounted vivid details about Mary that were both heartwarming and heart-wrenching. Mary was the kind of soul who could light up even the darkest room, Eleanor said softly, her voice tinged with bittersweet nostalgia. I remember how she would tirelessly organize community fundraisers and spend hours listening to anyone in need. She wasn't just part of our town. She was its spirit, its heart. Eleanor showed Ben a collection of handwritten notes and photographs, images of Mary laughing with neighbors at a summer picnic, organizing holiday events at the community center, and even candid moments of quiet reflection in a sunlit garden. Each image, each note, built a mosaic of a life that was vibrant, compassionate, and tragically short. As days turned into weeks, Ben's search deepened. In the town's modest community center, a converted building with high, echoing ceilings and walls adorned with historical memorabilia, he uncovered more clues about Mary's active role in local life. Residents, many of whom had known her personally, shared recollections that were as diverse as they were moving. In one conversation, a kindly older gentleman recalled how Mary had once rescued a stray dog and cared for it until it found a home, a small act that had endeared her to everyone in the neighborhood. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type smartphone if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. Now let's continue with the story. In another instance, a middle-aged woman described how Mary had organized a fundraiser to repair the local church's roof, rallying the community with her contagious optimism. Every story wove a richer tapestry of Mary's character, a woman whose empathy and determination had left an indelible mark on everyone she met. Evenings were often spent in quiet reflection at a local diner, where Ben and Edward would sit by a window, watching as rain fell in gentle sheets on the neon-lit pavement outside. Over plates of warm, comforting food, they would discuss the fragments of history that Ben had unearthed. Edward, who had known Mary from a different perspective, shared his own recollections, stories of a sister who had been as generous with her love as she was with her time. "I remember," Edward recalled one night, his voice low and thoughtful, "how Mary always believed that every person has a story worth listening to. She would sit with anyone, strangers, neighbors, even those who had lost all hope, and simply listen. That, I think, was her greatest gift." As Ben delved deeper into the archives, he discovered letters written by Mary to a friend, letters that spoke of dreams, of plans for a better future, and of an unspoken hope that one day, love and kindness could conquer even the harshest of circumstances. One letter in particular caught his attention, a lengthy, heartfelt missive in which Mary described her vision for a community where every person was valued, where small acts of kindness were the seeds of great change. The letter was filled with poetic musings on the beauty of nature, the importance of empathy, and the belief that every ending was merely a prelude to a new beginning. Every piece of evidence, every conversation with a local, and every cherished relic that Ben encountered added layers to his understanding of his mother. The journey was not just an academic exercise, it was a pilgrimage, a deeply personal quest to reclaim a part of his identity that had long been shrouded in mystery and loss. With each new discovery, Ben felt a growing sense of connection to Mary, a connection that was as profound as it was healing. It was as if, through the tangible remnants of her life, he was beginning to feel her presence once again, a soft whisper of reassurance that even in absence, love endures. By the time Ben and Edward prepared to leave the town, Ben's collection of memories had grown into a treasure trove of emotional riches. Letters filled with hope and longing, faded photographs capturing moments of joy and sorrow, and countless stories that illustrated the enduring impact of Mary's kindness on a community that still remembered her fondly. With every piece he gathered, Ben's understanding of who he was deepened, transforming his perception of his past from one of fragmented hardship into a narrative of resilience, love, and continuity. In that small town, amidst the echoes of history and the genuine warmth of its people, Ben found not only answers about his mother, but also a renewed sense of self, an affirmation that the legacy of compassion and hope could light the way forward, no matter how dark the journey had once seemed. In the quiet aftermath of revelations and rediscovered history, Ben found himself standing at the threshold of a new chapter, a chapter defined not by the weight of struggle, but by the promise of healing and hope. The journey that began in the bustling streets of Riverton and led him through the intimate corridors of Jefferson High, the tender recovery of his father, and the painstaking search for his mother's legacy had transformed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. Now, with Edward's long-hidden truths woven into the fabric of their family story and the tender memories of Mary illuminating the path forward, Ben felt a profound shift within his heart. Late one crisp evening, as the fading light painted the sky in hues of amber and lavender, Ben sat quietly with Tom and Edward in their modest living room. The air was filled with a gentle stillness, a silence not of emptiness, but of unspoken understanding and a shared resolve to move forward. Tom's soft smile, a rare and cherished sight in recent times, spoke of gratitude and renewal. Edward's presence, once shrouded in mystery, now radiated warmth and reconciliation, a bridge mending the long-ago chasm of separation. In that tender atmosphere, Ben's thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the remarkable journey he had undertaken. A journey marked by unexpected kindness, deep-seated family secrets, and the resilience of the human spirit. Ben remembered the early mornings when every day was a battle against the cold and hunger, the desperate yet determined moments at the market, and the weight of responsibility that had so long defined his world. Those days, filled with hardship and isolation, had given way to experiences that illuminated the beauty of second chances. He recalled the quiet encouragement from Clara, the steady support from Mr. Andrews, now Edward, and the comforting, bittersweet stories of his mother that had been scattered like pieces of a forgotten puzzle. Each memory, each revelation, added layers to his identity, reshaping his understanding of what it meant to truly live and love. In the soft glow of that evening, Ben acknowledged that his life was no longer solely defined by past sorrows or relentless struggles. Instead, it was an evolving narrative, a tapestry woven from threads of loss and hope, pain and reconciliation, solitude and newfound family bonds. The discovery of his mother's legacy had not only reconnected him with the woman he had never met, but had also rekindled a sense of belonging that had long eluded him. It was as though every piece of history, every letter, every photograph had been a stepping stone toward a future where he could embrace his past and forge a brighter tomorrow. Ben felt a stirring deep within, a quiet assurance that the hardships he had endured had prepared him for this moment of transformation. The uncertainty of the future no longer seemed like a looming threat, but rather an open canvas, inviting him to paint a life filled with purpose, love, and the promise of new beginnings. In the company of those who had once been separated by time and pain, he realized that family was not merely defined by blood, but by the strength of shared experiences and the courage to embrace vulnerability. As night fell and the first stars appeared, Ben silently vowed to honor the legacy of those who had come before him. He promised to nurture the bonds that had been restored, to live with gratitude for the second chances life had afforded him, and to step boldly into a future where hope outshone despair. In that moment, the echoes of his past transformed into the guiding light of his future, a future where every challenge would be met with the strength of his convictions and the unwavering support of a reunited family. Ben's journey was far from over, but he now faced it with a renewed spirit and an unshakable belief in the possibility of change. With each passing day, he would continue to grow, learning that even in the midst of loss, there is a profound beauty in rediscovery, a beauty that lies in the connections we forge, the secrets we unveil, and the hope that, even in the darkest moments, love can light the way. Ben spent his life fighting to earn every bit of success on his own. He learned that true strength lies in allowing others to help. By opening his heart to support, Ben found a new way forward. Do you believe accepting help changed his destiny for the better? Share your thoughts and rate his journey from 0 to 10. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more inspiring stories, and click on the end screen to explore more transformative tales.